All of you have heard of photosynthesis. I know you have. Not only because I know everyone's taken regular biology, but also because photosynthesis is something you learn about in elementary school. This is the process that plants use to make food, and they use their sunlight. They use light from the sun to make food within their own cells, something humans have tried to replicate in a lab, but we have not been successful because it would be really cool to just be able to make food from sunlight. But we do not know how to do that. All right, the basics. So it's a process used by plants, algae. Algae are actually protists, they're not plants. And some bacteria that transforms light energy into chemical energy. While harnessing sunlight, it uses carbon dioxide and water as starting materials. That carbon dioxide, they get it from the air. That's what we breathe out every second of every day. And then water, they get it from the ground. They suck it up through their roots. The chemical energy produced by photosynthesis is stored in the bonds of sugar molecules. Remember when we talked about chemical reactions, a chemical reaction breaks the bonds of certain molecules and then energy is released. And then those bonds get rearranged somehow. The organisms that use photosynthesis are called photosynthetic autotrophs. They're also called the producers for most ecosystems, meaning they produce the most energy to maintain the entire ecosystems. If there's no plants, then entire ecosystems collapse and all of the animals above them die. So, examples, plants. Plants are mostly found on land. Some are found near the water, maybe not in. Photosynthetic protists, aquatic, kelp, seaweed, algae. These are all actually protists, not plants, even though they look like plants. We have a whole chapter on protists later and what those are. And then there's photosynthetic bacteria, also aquatic, found in the water. Cyanobacteria is what that is, and it's just an example. There's a few others. Chloroplasts is the site of photosynthesis. When we went over cells, we talked about how plant cells have chloroplasts. We're going to learn a little bit more about them today. So the green color of chloroplasts is from a pigment called chlorophyll, a light-absorbing pigment that plays a central role in converting solar energy into chemical energy. Something else plant cells have that is important for gas exchange are called stomata. They're tiny pores in leaves where carbon dioxide enters and oxygen exits. So to me, it looks like a little mouth. And we breathe through our mouth. We breathe in oxygen. We breathe out carbon dioxide. So these are the plant's little mouths where they do the opposite. They take in carbon dioxide and they put out oxygen. And chloroplasts and the stomata are just two different structures found in leaves of plants. And chloroplast is the structure and chlorophyll is the pigment. If you crack open a chloroplast, there are other structures inside. It has grana, which are stacks of coin-shaped compartments. The individual coins themselves are called thylakoids. And then it has stroma, which is jelly-like fluid inside the chloroplast that surrounds the grana. And the stroma is kind of like the cytoplasm. It's jello consistency, and it just kind of holds everything in place. That's what the cytoplasm does for our entire cell. The equation of photosynthesis, there's an actual chemical equation that goes with this. It's the opposite of cellular respiration. So 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water combined with sunlight to make glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. So in this slide, you have that in equation form, in word form, and in cute little picture form. Sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water go in, oxygen and glucose come out. There's 2 stages to photosynthesis. The equation is simplified, but one reactant goes to one product and the other reactant goes to the other product. So the light-dependent reactions, the light reactions or the light-dependent reactions, it can be called either, is phase 1. And then the dark or the light-independent reactions is phase 2. It can also be called the Calvin cycle after the scientists that figured it out. So they all have different names, but they all depend on whether the plant is getting light or not. The light reactions. First, the chlorophyll captures energy from sunlight. So in other words, these reactions depend on how much sunlight the plant gets. If there's no sunlight, there's nothing to capture. This reaction doesn't happen. But if there's light, the chlorophyll captures it. This part takes place in the thylakoids, or the little coins. Water and sunlight are needed for this part, and energy is transferred by ATP. So this is a dramatization, a picture of a chloroplast. Half of the reactants are on top. You have the light and the water go through the light reactions in the thylakoids, and oxygen comes out as the product to this half. And then the light independent reactions, like I said, or the dark reactions or the Calvin cycle, it's all the same thing. It takes place in the stroma with the jelly-like fluid. And it involves the other reactant, which is carbon dioxide. So it uses products of the light reactions, including ATP, to drive the production of sugar from CO2. It depends on these products, but not sunlight itself, so it works independently of the sunlight. So it needs the products from the light reactions, the ATP that it generates, but it doesn't necessarily need the sunlight. The initial incorporation of carbon from the atmosphere into organic compounds is called carbon fixation. When we take in carbon and make it into something else that we incorporate into our bodies, or the plants incorporate into their bodies, it is basically fixing the carbon to be able to use it in a functional form. So there is the other half. So we already saw the left half is the light reactions that need it. And then the right half with all the black arrows, those are the dark reactions, or the Calvin cycle. So you have all the reactants of the equation on the top, And CO2 goes through the Calvin cycle, gets rearranged and paired with ATP and hydrogen, and sugar comes out. So instead of an equation going from left to right, like we saw, this equation is going with the reactants on the top, the processes are all in the middle, and then the products are on the bottom. Pigments. Visible light is the fraction of the spectrum that eyes see as different colors. When sunlight shines on a pigmented material, certain wavelengths are absorbed and disappear from our sight. For example, we see a pair of jeans as blue because pigments in the fabric absorb all of the other colors, leaving only blue to be reflected. So the colors that we see are the colors that are being reflected back at us. All the other colors are getting absorbed. So trees reflect green. It doesn't absorb green. It reflects green. So therefore, that is what we see. There's only a very, very small light spectrum that we can see as visible light. You can see radio waves, microwaves, infrareds, ultraviolet X-rays, gamma rays. Those are all on the spectrum, but we can't actually see them. We only see the colors of the rainbow all mixed up. So, like I said, this is why plants are green to us. It's called selective absorption. Green is poorly absorbed by chloroplasts and therefore reflected as the color that we can see. So that is a picture of a spectrophotometer, or the product that a spectrophotometer would put out and we would be looking at in lab. You'll be looking at it online this week. But the higher numbers, the purple and the blue on the left, and then the orange and the red on the right, plants absorb those colors very, very highly. So percent absorption. The higher the absorption, the less we see. Green at the bottom does not get absorbed. It gets reflected, the opposite. So that is the color our eyes get to pick up. Chloroplast contains several pigments, not just chlorophyll, but chlorophyll is the main one. So chlorophyll A absorbs mainly blue, violet, and red light and participates in the light reactions. Participates directly in the light reactions. Chlorophyll B absorbs mainly blue and orange light and participates indirectly in the light reactions, meaning it needs some light, but it's a secondary pigment. It can do its job without a lot of light. Carotenoids absorb mainly blue-green light. So when you look at carotenoids, you don't see blue-green light. They participate indirectly in the light reactions, and they absorb and dissipate excessive light energy that might damage chlorophyll. So this is kind of like a protector. If it's getting too much sunlight, the carotenoids will absorb some of it, so the chlorophyll doesn't get damaged, because the chlorophyll is what participates directly in photosynthesis, and that's the important one, the making of the food. The colors of fall foliage are due partly to the yellow-orange light reflected from carotenoids. You always hear beta carotene, found in carrots. What color is carrots? Carrots are orange. So beta carotene is a carotenoid that reflects basically orange, yellowish orange. Our leaves don't typically turn this color, but Becky's they do. And it's very pretty. The spectrophotometer. When you hear the word spectrum, it usually refers to color. Photo means light, and meter is a unit of measurement. So it's a machine that measures color and light. And we would usually be one if we were sitting in lab, be using one if we were sitting in lab. But you guys will be watching videos on the spectrophotometer for Lab 11 this week. Photons. Light from the sun behaves as photons, a fixed quantity of light energy. The shorter the wavelength of light, the greater the energy of the photon. It's getting into a little bit of chemistry and physics here. And chlorophyll molecules absorb photons. That is their job. Electrons in the pigment gain energy and become excited. As the electrons fall back to their ground state, energy is released as heat or light. So you can usually kind of picture it as a glowing molecule. Chlorophyll will absorb the photon, get really excited and start glowing, but only for a little bit. And as that glow fades and it kind of drops and becomes not glowing anymore, that's falling back to their ground state. As it's falling back to their ground state, that's when energy gets released. Photosystems. In the thylakoid membrane, chlorophyll molecules are organized with other molecules to form photosystems. So it's a cluster of a few hundred pigment molecules that function as a light-gathering antenna. When a photon strikes one of the pigment molecules, the energy jumps from molecule to molecule until it arrives at the reaction center. So the photosystems, like I said, it's a cluster of pigment molecules and it has a little center. As the photons strike it and make it glow, kind of sets off a chain reaction until the photon gets to the middle. The reaction center of the photosystem consists of a chlorophyll A molecule that sits next to another molecule called a primary electron acceptor, which will trap the light-excited electron from chlorophyll A. I lost my lecture notes. Stand by, technical difficulties. All right, so another team of molecules built into the thylakoid membrane then uses that trapped energy to make both ATP and NADPH. Usually we talk about ATP as our energy molecule, but NADPH is another one. It's a little more complicated one, which is why we usually just go with ATP. But if you get into majors biology or if you get into chemistry, chemical classes, organic chemistry, you'll talk a lot about NADPH.